Bonjour, Tanzi. We start this day's commemoration of Louis Riel's execution by thanking Creator for the many blessings you have given these many years and for your ongoing guidance. We also extend gratitude to Mother Earth for all that she provides to us and to all our relations. Merci, Creator, for bringing us together, for giving us time to reflect on Louis Riel's life, his vision for the Métis, his stand against the Government of Canada for its encroachment on Métis rights and way of life, and for paying the ultimate price of his life for his beliefs. We also thank you, Creator, for providing the Métis with the courage and the determination to find our way out of decades of oppression and suppression, for enabling us to preserve and to pass on our way of life from generation to generation, for making it possible to openly and proudly celebrate Métis culture and achievements amongst ourselves, as well as with all Canadians. Today, in Toronto, we thank you, Creator, for the positive relationship building and increased collaboration we are experiencing with the City of Toronto and with other levels of government. We also thank you for the strength of our relationships and our bonds of friendship with First Nations and Inuit peoples. We end this prayer by reflecting on Louis Riel's legacy as a fierce defender of the fundamental values of equality, minority rights, and social justice. And we ask you, Creator, to provide the courage and the unfailing determination that Louis Riel exemplified to all who have a role in implementing the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action and the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls calls for justice. Since we all have a role, however big or small, in moving these dials forward, we ask you to keep nudging each of us to step up and do our part. Merci, miigwech, for all your blessings. Mayor Tory.
Tanzi, thank you very much, Senator Brunel. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that we are meeting here today on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Welcome to Toronto City Hall and to Nathan Phillips Square. And as has been the case through the pandemic, we are more limited in terms of what we can do to acknowledge very important occasions, but we've proceeded with them nonetheless. And through technology, people are able to share with us in acknowledging these very important occasions today to help to raise the Métis flag at Toronto City Hall and proclaim Louis Riel Day in the City of Toronto. I'm honoured to be joined by President Margaret Froh of the Métis Nation of Ontario, by Shirley DeBasic, the President of the Toronto and York Region Métis Council, and fiddler Alicia Bloor, who is doing so well and was honoured more recently by being able to play at the installation of our new Governor General. We mark Louis Riel Day each year on November the 16th. It is in fact a sad day in Canadian history. It's the day on which Louis Riel was executed by the Government of Canada in 1885 for his beliefs, but for leading the Northwest resistance in defence of the Métis, and those were his very strongly held beliefs in terms of what he did at that time. For those who don't know, troops from Toronto were sent to suppress the resistance. This is a shameful part of our history. For many years, Louis Riel was portrayed as a traitor and a rebel. Unfortunately, this characterization still persists to some extent today. But we now know better, as the Métis community has always known, that Louis Riel was a fierce advocate of the Métis people and of their rights, who fought for what he believed in and stood up for the rights of an equity-deserving people. I hope that future generations will know this truth about this political and spiritual leader. This is why today is so important and why we gather here at Toronto City Hall to raise this flag. To raise awareness around Louis Riel, to acknowledge those parts of our history that we need to look at very carefully so as to learn and to understand and not to repeat. Mais nous savons maintenant, comme la communauté Métis l'a toujours su, que Louis Riel était un défenseur acharné du peuple Métis, qui s'est battu pour ce en quoi il croyait et a défendu les droits des personnes méritant l'équité. J'espère que les générations futures connaissent cette vérité sur ce grand leader politique et spirituel. C'est pourquoi ce jour est important et pourquoi nous nous rassemblons pour lever le drapeau, pour faire connaître Louis Riel et pour reconnaître les parties de notre histoire dont nous ne sommes pas fiers. On Louis Riel Day, we also acknowledge the proud and vibrant Métis community here today across our country, but also right here in the City of Toronto, and the immense contributions they're making on a day-to-day basis to our city and to our country. While the history of Toronto's racial relationship with the Métis community is complex, we at the City are trying to take considerable action to heal the wounds of colonialism and to take significant steps towards reconciliation. I look forward to working with the Toronto and York Region Métis Council, the Métis Nation of Ontario, and other community groups as we move towards our common goal of improving the lives of Métis people, Métis residents here in the City of Toronto. Awareness, atonement, action. These are all spoken about in the context of reconciliation, in fact, in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. All are important, and I'm trying my very best as Mayor to address myself to all three. But action, ranging all the way from the symbolic but important flying of the Métis flag here at City Hall, not just on Louis Riel Day today, but on every single day of the year just behind me here, that is something that happened in recent times and something that is symbolically important. On a more permanent basis, that action extends to our very substantive, historic commitment of 5,200 units of affordable housing for Indigenous Torontonians. And I hope these are signs of a real commitment. You see them as signs of a real commitment from a mayor and from a city administration, with more to come. On behalf of the City of Toronto, I invite all residents to learn more about the true history of Louis Riel, his legacy, and the valuable contributions in the history of our Métis people here in Toronto and right across Canada and throughout our history. And now I invite President Fro, President DeBasig, and Senator Brunel to join me in raising the Métis flag, and then President Fro and President DeBasig will say a few words, and I'm assuming at some point in time we're going to hear some fiddling in association with all that. I'm looking forward to all of that and more. Merci.
So Tanshi, Kilau, good morning, good afternoon, Mayor Tory and representatives of the Toronto York Region Métis Council. It is my pleasure to be here today for the raising of the Métis Nation flag here at Toronto City Hall. And I want to start by acknowledging Senator Suzanne Brunel for a beautiful prayer to get us started. And that's something that we always do. It's part of our culture as Métis people to start any sort of an event or meeting off in a really good way. And I just wanted to say I very much appreciated the Mayor's comments. Today is a day that, it is a sad day in that it marks the anniversary of the hanging of Louis Riel. It's also a day for Métis here in Ontario and right across the Métis Nation homeland. It's a day of strength, where we remember the strength of our leaders. We remember Louis Riel and what he gave, paid the ultimate sacrifice in order to stand in support of Métis rights. And as such an amazing speaker and advocate for Métis and others within this country, talking about basic concepts of human rights before there was a concept of human rights. And I wanted to acknowledge as well the work that our Toronto York Region Métis Council are doing, and acknowledge President Shirley DeBasig and Senator Brunel, as well as our fiddler, Alicia Bloor, who's with us this morning, an award-winning fiddler who brings that important music, the fiddle, into our ceremonies and what that means to us as a people. So today we talk about Louis Riel and we commemorate the hanging of Louis Riel, but we really talk about his life and his legacy. And I think, just echoing the mayor's comments, we have been talking a lot within Canada around truth and reconciliation, and so it's important for us to tell the truth of Louis Riel, the truth of the history of how Métis people and First Nations and Inuit have been treated within this country, and that we come to a reckoning on those things, this commitment to reconciliation, that notion of awareness, atonement, and action, I think is just so important. And I want to actually acknowledge you, Mayor Tory, for the work that you are doing, the City of Toronto and the Indigenous Affairs Office here in the city, the work that you are doing to actually not just raise awareness and acknowledge the history that Toronto played in the oppression of Métis and other Indigenous peoples, but actually the action, the concrete steps that you are taking to build a positive relationship with our Métis community here and the broader Indigenous community in Toronto, and the commitments that you are following through on in terms of righting those wrongs, righting those historic wrongs. And I think that that's absolutely commendable, and I wanted to acknowledge you and your leadership. And to say that for all of you who are marking Louis Riel Day this year, there is so much for us to celebrate. We have struggled as a people. We have been denied at the treaty table. Our lands have been taken from us. Our language has been taken from us. We've been subject to terrible Canadian policy like the residential school and day school system, like the 60s scoop. But we are strong. We are still here. We are a vibrant and growing community that is carried on with the strength of our ancestors. And so today we honor Louis Riel. And again, I just want to acknowledge Mayor Tory and the City of Toronto for the work that they are doing, that I think goes a long way to actually moving forward on that path of reconciliation here in Toronto and in the broader Ontario community. So merci, happy Louis Riel Day.
Thank you, Senator Brunel, for the opening prayer. Today we're here, despite the challenges of the COVID-19, to honor the role that Louis Riel and the Métis people to the development of Canada. I am proud to be here today representing the local Métis Council and the Métis citizens of Toronto and York Region. In Toronto and York Region, our citizens come from across the nation, from Ontario and from the West. Our families are strongly connected, and many of us have connections to Louis Riel, who fought along beside him. We recognize Riel for his contribution in the building of Canada, and we recognize his role as a leader to our Métis people. He was unwaveringly in the fight for justice for the Métis people. He sacrificed everything. On this day in 1885, he was hung for high treason because he challenged the status quo by trying to gain minority rights and protect the rights of the Métis people. Today, we recognize Riel as a visionary, as a leader whose actions were principled and central to the creation of Canada and to achieving equality. We look to him as we strive as Métis people to follow in his footsteps, to continue to celebrate our uniqueness as Métis, to celebrate our culture, tradition, and families. As we celebrate our partnership with the City of Toronto that work with us to improve the lives of Métis people, we've came a long way, and we look forward to continuing our journey to advancing reconciliation with the City of Toronto. Merci, miigwech. And now, Alicia.